Hi, everybody. Welcome to the March Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center webinar. We are very excited today to actually get moving, think about a little bit about our physical health and our bodies on the aquaculture farms with Toni Small from FishAbility and also with Icehouse Oysters. So in a minute, we'll get started, but just a few housekeeping things. We do have another webinar that will be coming up in April. I believe it is April 19th. Somebody should check me on that. And that will be from 12 to 1 p.m. And we're going to be talking about social media management to help promote your farm. Chris did also just give me the thumbs up. April 19th is the date for that. So we hope to see you there for that. And that's all I got. Toni, it's all you. Let's get moving.
All right. Hi. Welcome, everyone. This is a little disorienting for me. I am really used to having two-way Zoom classes. So since I can't see you, I wish I could, but that's okay. We're gonna muddle through here, and we're gonna get going. But first, we call this best movement practices for your farm, kind of taking off of best management practices, right? Which are things we're always concerned with in terms of health of our critters, water quality, like all the things that we've been taught to do through lots of good people helping us kind of coach into farming, whether it's oysters or kelp or scallops. So I started, or mussels, I started oyster farming after an aquaculture and shared waters class in 2016. And it's been a bit of an evolution. I am also a movement practitioner, coach, yoga teacher, fitness teacher, and lately a strength coach. I've been really interested in working with older bodies primarily. But what I noticed is there was sort of an age event in my own life. Like women get this delightful moment in time where we switch gears hormonally, and it actually has a huge impact on our muscles, on our strength. And I noticed that, and I sort of went from feeling like, oh, I'm an asset to, oh, I'm a liability on the farm. Like that feels a little scary. So I was kind of curious about what was happening, and ended up kind of in my research figuring out like, oh, I need some strength training. And once I started the strength training, discovered that all of the other stuff, like I'm a bendy person, and sadly, yoga and stretching always seems to be for the bendy people in the room. But what I would like to caution is that really the bendy people don't need more bending. It's the people who are like qualitatively a little bit stiffer that probably will benefit more from the bending. And those of us who are naturally bendy kind of want to stiffen up and create muscle tension in the best sense of the word. We've taken a lot of words. We've taken the word stress and confused it with like, I don't want any more. We've taken the word tension and said, I don't want any more tension. We've taken stiffness and to say like, I can't get up in the morning and move. Like these are actually things we want in our bodies. It's just a balance of them. We want to kind of begin feeling like our bodies are a friend that we're developing a relationship with. We're kind of like, hey, how are you doing today? Do you need a little more relaxation? Do you need a little pep talk? Do you need to be building a little bit more strength? What I learned was in the building strength, I didn't lose any of my mobility, which I have plenty of, just genetically, but I gained a lot more back comfort, a lot more resilience in back comfort. And so that becomes really important. And so I found out about FishAbility through our beloved Dana Morse as a resource in 2021. And I was like, FishAbility, this is interesting. What's this? And I got in touch with Lonnie Carlson, who at the time was the program coordinator. And she was like, oh, a yoga teacher, come, let's talk. So we've put together a poster, yoga. There was a yoga for farmers already in the works. And then we've done a yoga for fishermen. I'm going to show you at the end of the slides how to get to the FishAbility website. You can see all of the poster poses in motion. So you can follow along with me, and I'm on a boat, I'm in the boatyard. Like it's, you know, places where we would actually want to take literally 30 seconds of our day and move, right? So that's like a little subset of what I'm going to talk about, in the sense that, unwinding your tissues for a few minutes in the middle of your workday is going to go a long way towards productivity. Like keeping yourself, if you're really tired, you're really cranky, you're just busting out one more string, one more line, whatever it is you're doing, if you can pause for 30 seconds and stretch as a counterpoint, it's going to go a long way, whether it's taking a breath, whether it's stretching the back of your legs because you've been standing still on your feet, whether you're taking a side stretch. Like I'll show you all that resource. But today I really kind of wanted to talk a little bit more about the progressive overloading, because it's counterintuitive, and it's particularly counterintuitive when we are what now the world is sort of, I don't know what the world is, but US is now classifying people who work with their bodies as industrial athletes. So aquaculture, fishing, dock working, like that all falls under that umbrella of industrial athletes. We're lifting a lot of weight. We're using our bodies as a primary tool. But there's all of the research online is really focused on people in warehouses. And so I'm going to jump into my slides and just kind of show you what I'm a little bit like illustrate what we're talking about. And I'm not going to take too long because I know the moving is the best part of this event. So play. So here we go. First slide. Don't really need to say any more, except I will say this. No, I have got it here on the slide. Specific adaptation to impose demands is the SAID principle. And then under FishAbility, one of the things we also talk about is ergonomics, right? And ergonomics comes from the ergo meaning work, nomics meaning natural laws. And there's just a little bit of history. We've had this in our vernacular since 1857, and it was used to work on efficiencies in human engineering of complex machines and weapons. So it was like the first thing was matching the shovel sizes and weights for the task, replacing one size fits all. Let's be honest. Replacing the shovel for the task is only one adaptation. Replacing the shovel for the task for the body doing the work would be the second adaptation. And so in looking at aquaculture, the truth is, like when I watch my husband, who's been a lobsterman, ground fisherman, bluefin tuna fisherman, when he's on his big Novi, it's like a dance, right? That guy knows exactly what the heck is going on. Like he's got the deck cleared, he's got his fishing lures here, he's got like, there's a beautiful rhythm that happens, right? And of course usually he's got somebody helping him. Sometimes he'll do a tuna fish by himself, but usually he's got somebody on the rod and he's steering, right? But it's this choreography, and it makes sense based on the task, like the job they're pursuing, and it makes sense based on the tools that they're using. We, as aquaculturists, are trying now to take those tools and push them into this new industry that's seemingly almost too young. Like we haven't figured out all the bits yet. And all the farms are so different. It's not like a tractor in Iowa is the same tractor you're going to get in Maine. Like there's lots of different variations just along the Maine coast. I was talking to a gentleman from the Cape at the conference in Rhode Island in January, and it was like totally different set of problems for him because the all of the farming itself is different. So we have a little bit of an extra struggle, I think, in that we are trying to fit one size fits all or one adaptation, right? We've got a boat on the water and that's handy, but it's not really designed yet for ocean farming. So if you are looking at evaluating Maine ergonomic risks, and if you were to say, okay, I'm going to look at my farm, Toni says I should look at like my tasks, right? We've got awkward or static work postures, such as bending, reaching, twisting with the neck, back, arms, or legs all day long. Forceful exertion, such as lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, or gripping all day long. Vibration, they had power tools, things you would use in the warehouse or on a construction site. I replaced them with the idea of just the outboard motor vibration, and also sounds from boat engines and tumblers, right? So that's auditory input to the body. That's nervous system trying to just like get through the day, but there's an awful lot of stimulus. Repetitive motions, I don't need to say much about that, right? Wrists, necks, arms, backs, knees, all day long. And contact stress is going to be things like continuous contacting or rubbing between hard and sharp objects. You could also think about wet clothes. You could think about what's under your feet, like what kind of surface you have under your feet. I love my muck boots because there's plenty of surface between my foot and the floor. Not everybody loves that, but you could also do something like an anti-fatigue mat, like thinking about what's cushioning you, thinking about how you're dressing, thinking about all those things, which that's kind of like the first realm I think we all tend to go to, because at least environmentally, we're working in the same zone as fishing. Proper lifting techniques. This is from OSHA themselves. Stand as close to the load as possible. Planting your feet shoulder width apart. 1 foot in front of the other. Bending at the hips and knees only until you're deep into a squatting position, and keeping your head up and straight with your shoulders back, yada, yada, right? This is like, you can begin to think, well, this doesn't happen on a farm very often. I mean, it does once you get product to shore. And these are their recommendations in terms of load. 60 pounds close to the body, 30 pounds could be a little further away, 15 pounds. You get my drift, right? Like the idea here is I'm trying to pull out, like, economically, aquaculture is currently pretty much not able to obey by many of these rules, right? We're all struggling to find some solutions. And I trust one day there will be some, but so I'm going to talk about neutral spine today, and we're going to talk about progressive overloading in terms of strength training. Obviously working here in the red zone, right? But I am keeping a neutral spine, and I'm going to show you what I mean in terms of a flex spine, I think, in the next slide. But the idea of using your legs, getting your hips back over your heels, and then maintaining a neutral spine is, neutral is basically maintaining the 4 natural curves of the spine, and then maneuvering with your arms in extension. But I will say progressive overloading as a strength maneuver is about developing our capacity to move in all directions, right? So the practices we're going to do today are kind of straight on, like squatting, a deadlift. We're going to be kind of linear, but the idea is that you're also developing capacity to move in all directions. And so it can be a little counterintuitive. It's not that I'm going to say, oh, go practice being, on 1 foot, upside down, sliding on the ice, holding a line, right? We want to be able to do that naturally because we're strong and we're prepared. So neutral spine and fundamental movement skills. So we're going to push today, we're going to pull, we're going to squat, hinge, rotate, and lunge. Pushing is actually the preferred method ergonomically for moving load. Again, we don't. Maybe once we get it to shore, there's pushing, right? Pushing overhead or getting a bag up overhead, emptying it out into the tumbler. But more often than not, we're pulling load. So you do plenty of pulling. One of the things that I think can be important to hear, I have a teacher named Jules Mitchell, who's a biomechanic, and I was in a seminar with her a while ago, and she was like, no, there are no repetitive stress injuries. And I was like, wait, what? That's all we know, repetitive stress injuries. And she was like, the problem is that we do something over and over and over again, and we're neglecting to train the counter move. So there's pulling, which we do a lot of, but chances are we're not training our push, right? And that can be really, really helpful for creating a kind of musculoskeletal balance, right? So the idea is, like, if the front of my body is like overdeveloped or something, the front of my shoulders is overdeveloped by the constant pulling, and I'm not taking the time to work on push from behind or balance those two front and back, side to side pieces out, that's where we can begin to get some comfort when we're feeling like, damn, like I can't do anything else but pull. How am I going to do this? So we can begin training our push. Our squat is going to be super helpful for maintaining strength. It's mobility, really, right? You want the strength and the flexibility. So that's in the joint, and that's the hip, knee, and ankle. And what the squat's going to end up doing also is creating the opportunity to add variation to your movements. So you're down at the edge of the boat, you know, like squatting, but you could put one knee down, you could put your arm on, you could kind of begin to find some variations. Hinge, as I demonstrated in that me overboard, reaching overboard. Rotate is for mobility's sake, but a big problem with low back pain is that people pick up heavy loads to the side and pull them up. You all imagine you do this a lot. Again, if you're training for it, right, you can train for that, but make sure you do it to the other side. Like, and I'm going to talk about how much load in a moment. So, but bearing that in mind, and then leg strength, lunge for strength and variation as well, unilateral versus bilateral. So here are the 4 curves of the spine. We've got cervical, thoracic, lumbar, and pelvic. Curves are actually both the sacrum, which are 4 bones fused, and the coccyx at the very bottom. But you can see, like, there's curvature, and that curvature is actually what creates the kind of stability we have in our spines. We are not compression creatures. We are biotensegrity creatures. We have webbing on the inside. So if you think of a spider web, she anchors her web to external points. We are webbed on the inside. The frame is the bones, and all of our tissue, if we begin to think of our tissues as web-like tensegrity, right? That's where that tension can come from, and we can develop some real power. So here, I don't know, do you guys, are you blocked by seeing the boxes on the right? I'm not sure. Anyway, the top of his spine, or actually the whole of his spine, is now in flexion, and he's pulling, right? So now what he's doing is he's got his spine in flexion and he's pulling. He does have this handy dandy little trap contraption, which looks awesome. For once you get the cage up over onto that, it's going to be a smooth surface, which would be super helpful, rather than having to pick it up and over yourself with your muscles. But how many, I mean, I think there's probably some mechanical advantage on this farm to get these cages flipped over, but I know for us as small farmers, we're doing it all by hand, right? So you're trying to figure out the best way to kind of like get the cage over. We have a rope that we pull from the opposite side to flip it. But again, spending a lot of time in flexion, you're loading the lumbar, the low back, and that's putting like undue stress on your lumbar vertebral discs and vertebral bodies. And over time, it hurts like hell. And that's where you want to begin thinking about, like, can I find neutral spine? Can I keep neutral spine and use my arms as an extension of that power? So I'm demonstrating now, granted, I'm not picking up something quite as heavy, but I'm taking my neutral spine from standing into the deadlift, into the squat. And so thinking about that, and it doesn't necessarily come naturally to all of us. If you have really limited flexibility, that can be something you're going to want to take slowly. Ironically, developing strength or developing muscular contraction, rather than trying to stretch your way into a position like me at the bottom right, you actually probably are going to have more success loading that shape. Muscles have no idea that you're stretching or loading. They are responding to the stimulus of weight, of load. So they're going to respond to the stimulus of like, whoa, okay, there's something here I'm managing. And if we do it progressively, that means not too much too soon, you can begin to feel the mobility come back because the muscles are actually behaving as they're designed to do. The trouble is, in our culture right now, we have this like, oh, if it hurts, don't do it. And I think movement educators are starting to have a little different scenario for the public, but it takes a while to come around and become like common speak. Most people these days still say, oh, just stretch or rest, ice, take an Advil or something stronger, which has its problems. I'm going to show you this at the end, just so, actually, I may just show you what he meant. So progressive overloading and work adaptations. So here's what I mean when I say, like, often what's happening now in our culture is like, hurts, do less, or that's been most common. Like, it's rare that you're going to go to someone and say, oh, this is busted, and or my back hurts, and they're going to say, oh, go get yourself to a gym and start a strength training program. It's not yet in the vernacular. I think it's coming. So I've used Milo of Croton here to demonstrate this. He was a young man, picked up his young bull and started walking with the bull over his shoulder. No idea why, but anyway, that's the story. Every day he picked up the bull and kept walking. The bull got bigger, the guy got bigger. It was a progressive growth of strength and bulk or mass. And so the man was adapted to the weight by the time the bull got big. I'm sure the bull didn't appreciate this, but anyway, the idea is we're going for progressively creating something more powerful in our bodies than we have at present. So here's the other thing. We can progressively underload. And this is where the danger of not getting counseled on strength training becomes a liability, because particularly, like, we're just coming out of our winter season, everybody's kind of getting jazzed about getting back on the farm, but you've maybe spent a winter where you were a little bit less active. So the muscles have actually had a chance to decondition. They've been unstressed or underloaded. And that's going to create a liability when we get all enthusiastic on a nice day and we're like, okay, we're going to go for it. And then we've got a coupling of enthusiasm that's mismatched to where the body is in its state. It will adapt, right? We all know that after a month or 2 months, we all start to feel like a little bit more jazzy and we've got this and it's fine. But we can end up in a real problem, particularly in the spring when we're coming out of this sort of softer, hopefully you've rested, but right, there's a little bit of a softer period. But that can also be something that happens any time of the year. So this is just, tissue mechanics, load, tension, compression, thinking about the structural integrity of a rope bridge, right? You'd want to know what the loading capacity is of the rope before you and all your friends stepped out onto that bridge. Maybe it's just built for one at a time, right? So same thing in terms of like, what's the stress capacity in my body? What can I actually lift? What can I move? What can I do on the regular? Ground reaction force. We've got body mass, gravity, bones. The good news is for all of you who do this work, your bones are probably in better shape than the majority of the population because they're under stress. They're underloaded. And I think our osteoporosis problem has to do with our under muscling. Like folks are starting to call it osteosarcopenia because they're related, right? The muscles pull on the bones, aggravating the reabsorption, the process of bone osteoclast, osteoblast. So loading progressively means you're increasing above normal loading patterns for you, not for me, not for anybody else in the room. It's for you, what your capacity is. Now what you want to think about doing is like, how do I increase the load for me? Conversely, as I just said, underloading is going to be an alternative problem. So the load itself is relative to the typical loading patterns. So meeting yourself where you're at. For me, this becomes the yoga. It's self-knowing and being really honest. And I have definitely had moments where I'm like, oh, I'm getting stronger. I'm going to pick up something a bit heavier and try and move it in a way that I shouldn't and suffered the consequences. So it is about sort of dialing it up, but all of us in this industry are going to have a higher capacity probably than, say, someone coming in off the street, or for folks who are in chairs a lot, right? That becomes a liability in and of itself. And you'd want to progress according to also what your daily activities are. So the specificity principle at work when we're training for progressive overload, first is coordination, just getting comfortable. We're going to go over some of these movements. Just getting comfortable with those movements. 2 is antagonist co-activation. So if I'm doing a bicep curl and I haven't done this before, my tricep, my muscles are smart. My body is smart. My tricep's going to be like, what the hell are you doing? Like, what's going on here? And it's going to try and put the brakes on the process. So you're going to feel this little, there's a bit of tension. What may be more useful actually is to actively contract both the bicep and the tricep, get like front and back again, getting these musculoskeletal relationships fired up and like kind of feeling into them. And then what begins to happen is as the body's nervous system begins to understand that you are progressively loading the bicep, it's gonna be like, oh, all right, I can back off. That tricep doesn't need to be working quite so hard at putting the brakes on. And that's when I begin increasing the strength of my bicep. So there's a lot of wisdom in our bodies around like progressing slowly. And there's an adaptation leap that's going to happen without you having to do much more than being consistent. The second adaptation process is the hypertrophy. That's, as I just said, the muscle, the bicep is just going to start to respond like, oh, I've got higher threshold motor units. I've got more load, right? A teacup, a beer is not going to train my bicep, right? I've got to have something that's a little bit heavier, right? So that's beginning to build that resistance, the tolerance for resistance, and then it begins to snowball, and it's pretty cool. Lateral force transmission is like stability of a joint, right? Laterally, so that not all of the tension is upper or lower arm. So we sadly also have done this thing to ourselves by dissecting the human and being like, oh, here's a bicep curl, strengthen your bicep. Here's a tricep thing, do the, tricep kickback. We're actually like a lattice webbing structure. We're not a single web, right? We're not a two-dimensional structure. We're actually this like living lattice work. And so what happens is as we get stronger, the juice of our muscles, that deep interior juice of our muscles, conveys to the fascia, the connective tissue, the ligaments, the tendons, right? There's a whole process of like, oh, we're going to transfer this load from the floor all the way up through the end of our fingertips, essentially. So there's a co-activation, but there's this co-support that comes with tendon stiffness. So I think this is my last slide. Best management practices for your body. Maybe think about like, oh no, I think my recommendation is, yeah, it's at the bottom. So I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in here and just say gym jargon here for a moment. I do this all at home. I have a barbell and plates. I have tools I'm going to show you. I do this all at home. I don't have to go to a gym, but there are numbers, there's math, there's a little bit of math involved. Your 1 RM is your 1 rep max. So if you get to your like fish tote of 100 pounds of oysters and you're like, hey, can somebody help me, right? That's a wise move, unless you're lifting 200 to 300 pounds deadlift on the regular, right? So there's this capacity ceiling. If we go around our farm and we're lifting 50 pounds on the regular, that's fine, right? We acclimate, we adapt to the stimulus, and we get stronger at the 50 pounds. But again, if we've got that soft winter and then coming back, the liability is going to be in that window where we go to pick up 50 pounds again, and we haven't been training. The training, this is what I've been taught that's been really helpful, is if you've got 50 pounds or 100 pounds that you want to regularly lift on your farm, and you're not training at double or triple that, you have there's a ceiling capacity liability. So what I'm doing by suggesting that you start progressively overloading is that you're going to build up your capacity. So there's an insurance cushion, right? So if I can tolerate 150 pound deadlift, which isn't that much, I've just gotten there and I've taken my time getting there, but it makes a huge difference when I go to lift 50 pounds that I can tolerate 150 pounds 3 times. And I'm like, oh, I'm actually curious about the 200 pound ceiling. I don't really feel the need to go much past that. But if you were a very strong person who often got asked, hey, can you lift this thing on the farm because you are strong? Like, it would behoove you to go figure out how to progressively train to come to that 300 pounds. So 100 pounds is not a liability. because that's a very shallow place to play. You're going to bump up into potential problems. So I would say, like, with that in mind, we can all progressively adapt. They're finding, like, elders are getting up out of hospital beds and they're doing their reps and they're doing their time, and they're able to lift their body weight in a matter of a couple of years. Some people are physically adapted to lift more quickly. I'm one of those, loosey-goosey people. I'm taking my time building it up, but it actually does gallop. It's kind of cool. So what I would say is analyzing your farm habits, like what are the work tasks that you're doing? What are the movement types? And then begin looking at, like, how can I train, right? I started by saying you can unwind with some stretching if you've got like a super intense period of lifting, moving everything on the farm, like all those things. Like, I would emphasize stretching at that point. But you can imagine, like, by next winter, when you start to break and have a little bit of time off and you just like, oh, I just want to rest, that would be actually the time to pick up a progressive overload training, so that as you come back into the spring, you're totally ready to go. And then you can begin imagining, like, oh, I can develop best practices for my body on my farm throughout the year that kind of complement what's going on. Maybe you don't need the lifting because you're doing so much lifting on the daily, but you need some cardio or conditioning, like taking a walk, stretching, doing some restorative practice, things like breathing. So there's ways to kind of, I can't say it all fast enough, but there are definitely ways to work with it. So let's move. I knew that was going to take too long, but I'm going to suggest something. I'm going to jump out of here. I'm not going to show that because we're going to talk about that in a second, but I wanted you to see the FishAbility site. And let's see, can I bring this back? Okay. So on the FishAbility site.
Oh, Toni, I think it's not showing right now, just so you know.
Oh.
Yeah, it was showing still
The
your
slideshow still? All right.
Yeah, I think if you shared that screen directly.
Yep. Yep. Here we go.
There you go. All good.
Awesome. So it's on the extensionu.maine.edu AgriBility fishing resources. And there's a whole list of stretches. And at the bottom of each we have like a work task and a counter stretch. And then there's a video. So, like, you don't have to work too hard to go find some stretching. I'm going to see if I can scroll up from there. Yeah, so we call this putting the boat on the hook, and then the stretch break, right? So this is Herman Coombs putting his boat on the mooring, right? There's like this funny, like, you got to crawl up the side of the boat with your mooring, you're tugging on the line, the boat's got drag, like there's all that energy. So then, like, untwisting, just beginning to notice, like, recalibrate after repetitive motions in one direction. Can we go in the opposite direction? So let me just show you the top of that page. So these are the list of stretches. So I think there are 8. This is the Maine AgriBility site. You just come to the FishAbility page. There are other resources, but I just wanted to point out that one. And FishAbility, I will say, can come. We have 3 OTs. If you wanted someone to come and do like a movement analysis of your farm with you, you could have someone come from FishAbility. They would come out, watch you working, preferably get to watch you working, and then start making some recommendations. It might be mechanical advantage ideas. It might be checking your sound, like whatever it is. There may be things that we'd be able to help you with. So just know that is a free resource to anyone in Maine, and you are in the industry, they will come and see you. All right, we're going to move. I am going to close that window, I think, and that, this is not necessary. And we're going to move. So stop share. Is that going to highlight me again, Maya?
Yeah, you're all good. Do you want me also highlighted so you've got someone to critique if I'm doing it wrong? Okay.
That'd be great. That'd be awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Because sometimes it is helpful for folks to see some options. So
okay,
here's the thing. Here's the thing. let's all, I've made, like, I'm in my teaching space. If you have a place where you can get out of your chair and come to the floor. So I won't be able to see you now, Maya, and that's okay. If you have a spot, you can come to the floor. And I think you should be able to see me. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, you're good. I'll let you know.
All right. All right, good. So we're on the floor. Just take a moment to like enjoy that, hopefully. Hopefully you've kicked your shoes off. And we're just going to take a bridge practice, which is rocking the hips back, pushing down into the feet, and then you're going to pick your hips up off of the floor by pushing into the back of your legs and then coming back down again. And then we're going to do that again. So you're just going to push down, lift up. Because I'm sure not everybody has a bunch of weight at home, although I'm going to show you some ideas. I wanted to just give you a chance to feel a little bit of the back line. This is the back line of the body, back of the legs, the glutes, the hips, right? Moving up towards the ceiling and then rolling back down again. It's a gentle way to activate that back line and to strengthen that back line. There's lots of variations we could throw on top, but we're just kind of getting familiar with that movement and feeling the flow from the feet up through the legs and then lowering down. Good. And then we're going to roll to one side. Come on up. We're going to come around onto hands and knees. And Maya, you can do this, or you can do this over the chair if you feel like you want to keep an eye on things. We're going to do the palm raises that we did on Wednesday.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got weight in our hands. So the first thing I'm actually going to do is send my hips back and peel my hands off the floor, coming on to the palms, coming onto the heels, and then put them down. So just picking them up, putting them down, picking them up, putting them down. So this would be a nice way to unwind, and or you may be encountering a bit of stiffness or stress, depending on how much work you've been doing already on the farm. And then you could come onto hands and just begin to turn them. So my hips are now more in the air than they are back over my heels, which means I'm loading, right? You can feel there's more weight. If this is painful, take your hips back. I'm decreasing the angle at my wrist, but I'm still mobilizing the wrist, stretching the hands, the forearms, all sorts of things. You can even come down, getting the back of your hands, right? And this is something you can do standing at your desk. You could do it standing over the back of a chair, right? If coming down to the floor didn't feel accessible. And then we're going to bring the hands directly under the shoulders. And we're going to lift the thumbs. We're going to lift the heel of the hands. And then we're going to put the heel of the hands back down and leave the thumbs up. So this is called a palm raise. And it can be super intense on the forearms. I imagine many of you have pretty strong forearms, so it may not be out of the realm of possibility. This is like, oh, okay. The more load you put on, right, if you want to move your weight forward a little bit, the harder it gets. If you need it to be a little bit gentler, move your hips back. But the idea would be you're getting both a stretch, quote unquote stretch, you're loading the fingers, you're pushing the fingertips into the ground, lifting the heel of the hands, but you're not pushing on the thumbs, just to be clear. Good. All right, we are going to, Maya's ready for all the deadlifting, so I got to catch up. So let's go ahead. We're going to tuck our toes, right? So it's just nice to do a little bit of warm up here, and loading is a really nice way to start to warm up. So I'm going to tuck my toes and just lift my knees, and all of a sudden now I'm in a really in a push practice. I'm not in plank. I'm in what's called table, but I've got my knees off the ground and then I'm going to put them back down again. So I'm loading the shoulder, but you'll notice I'm loading in push, right? I'm not pulling, I'm lifting my knees. I've got my shoulder blades spread wide. I'm not sinking my spine towards the floor. I'm resisting gravity, pushing down and then lowering down. And then you can feel that gentle kind of release. So one more time, pushing down and then release. All right, depending on how folks' knees are, let's come to standing. So if you wanted to practice a lunge on the way up, it's harder, right? A concentric going against gravity is going to be more challenging than coming down. So if you do have knee issues, you know, you could just come to standing however is comfortable. To practice a lunge, if you had knee issues and you didn't feel like coming up and down, you could just practice going down. Like I might do something for, if someone said, oh, you know, my knees are really having a problem, I would probably do something like a chair pose or a squat and step back, right? Then eventually you could probably get down and up. You can abbreviate, you can hold on. I have a dowel, which is handy. You could use a chair, right? You could use a little support. So you can get the strength where you need the strength. And this is lunge. This is one of our fundamental movements. That's why I'm emphasizing it. It's also great for building strength in the knees, right? So again, if you need a little assist, you can use a chair, you can use a dowel, but getting that strength into your lunge could be really nice. Good. All right. Let's just do a little bit of a shoulder stretch because you all, if you have a TheraBand, you're welcome to grab it. But if you don't, that's okay. We're going to take a little bit of shoulder stretch. So this is called the swimmer's stretch. Arms come up, and then your palms are going to face forward, come down. As your arms come down, hands are going to turn. You're going to fold your elbows, thumbs point towards each other, and you can let them hinge as much as you, or as much as you want, as much as you can. Right, so I'm going to scoop back up. So this is actually usually practiced on the floor, face down. That can be a lot for some people, particularly if there are shoulder mobility issues. I'm just going to show it from all sides. Reaching up. So I've adapted to standing because I just find that's a lot more comfortable for folks. But it's getting your shoulders into a lot of range of motion. Excellent. Let's take one more. Reaching up and back. Okay. From here, if you have your chair, this can be done on the floor. It could be done on the wall. I like a mid-level height for it. It's a rotation stretch. So I'm going to come back to, or mobilization, I should say. I'm not sure I would. It's really about getting our legs stable and rotating from the waist. So again, we don't want to necessarily pick up a lot of load and twist, but twisting itself is a great, it's a great thing to have. So coming into a stance where you've got your hands on the seat of the chair. Yep, and you got your long back. So if my left leg is forward, my left arm is going to reach in between my right hand and my left thigh. Yep, and you can look over that right shoulder. And then you're going to sweep the arm up like you're swinging a golf club and come into a long spiral twist. And then back down. Good. And back up. and you're moving from the waist. So my legs, my hips are pretty stable, and I'm swinging with the arm. And then let's just go ahead and step the back foot forward. From here, we're going to go into that neutral spine. So hang tight, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of movement to warm up. So we've got the right leg forward, left leg back, left hand is pushing, and the right hand sneaks between the thigh and the left arm, and then comes up into a big twist. That's it. You got it. Nice. That's it. All right. Good. So from there, we're going to bring both feet close to the chair. I'm going to take this layer off so it's a little clearer for you all. We're going to work on that, the 4 curves of the spine. So because I'm not in the room with you, I'm going to show you a couple of ways to find this for yourselves. One is just to take the fist of one hand, bring it around to your low back. Imagine you're sitting back in the chair. Like if it helps you, just take your hips over the chair as if you were going to sit back and then come on back up. Yep. If you find that once you start hinging your back rounds, that's not neutral spine. That is flexion we do all day long, pulling stuff out of the water, right? So this is where we want to find neutral spine. So this is also probably going to mean you may have some, like if you have tightness in your glutes or the back of your legs, it may be challenging to release the tailbone back, but if you can, sitting back down, come on up. Another way to do this, if you have a broom, a gaff, a dowel, a handy dandy dowel, you can bring it to the back. And remember, we have cervical curve is not touching, but the back of the head is. My thoracic rib cage is touching, but my lumbar curve is not. And then my sacral curve is touching. So same thing, I could bring my spine to, I'm going to switch my hand so you can see. Bring my spine in alignment, hinge at the top of my thighs, like where your pants crease, or imagine you're sitting back into a chair, come down, come back up. That's it. That's it. See, Maya had this lesson on Wednesday, and she's learned really well how to keep the rib cage over the pelvis. So some of us who are super flexible, right? And you may be more flexible than you realize. I've seen a lot of oyster farmers with a lot of flexibility, frankly. There's a tendency to like, oh, I'm gonna break my spine, not break it literally, but break the coupling between my ribs and my hips, and that's gonna get me into the chair. And so that would look like this, right? I'm creating a, oh, hang on. That would look like if I go from here to here.
So it's almost overextending like this in the opposite.
It is, exactly. It's basically translating your ribs forward. And once you start translating your ribs forward to get your arms up, to get your butt back, you're uncoupling the intra-abdominal pressure that we want for core stability and strength between the diaphragm, the breathing diaphragm, and our pelvic floor. So if anybody has, like I was going through the house before we started to find items that had some weight that weren't weights, a deadlift is essentially sitting in the chair with neutral spine. You're just going to pick up an object at the bottom. So I found a full gallon of paint. It's probably not much more than 5 gallons. I mean, 5 pounds. But if you have a little something that you can pick up, neutral spine. The other thing I did was, I mean, you did this the other day, Maya. You can pretend. I also have a laundry basket that I put some cans of beans in. Like it can be like, yeah, exactly. There you go. I can even put my can of paint in on top or beside, right? So I can do this at home, right? With like a laundry basket and a bunch of weights. If you have some little hand weights, right? But the idea would be to get yourself as close to the weight as possible at the hips, send your tailbone back, keeping the natural curves of the spine. Let your arms extend. You're not picking the thing up with your arms, you're picking them up with your legs. And that means you're pushing down to lift up and then lowering back down. So I'm trying to get the load straight up. This is again where I think for aquaculturists, this is a challenge. We don't get to work like this except maybe when we get all the oysters, you know, somewhere ready for the tumbler, ready for market, where we get to actually pick up like this. But again, remember, we're building strength so that when you're pulling from way out here, out in that zone where something's going on outside of the boat, you have the power here and the power here all through that back line to support you. Often what happens is we get front focused and we're pushing and pulling in a pretty unsustainable long-term way. A squat, so here's one thing to check with my eyes. And I do want to leave time for some questions, so I'm watching the clock. Just one note about squatting and hinging, right? So if I do a deadlift, my eyes are going to go down with my spine and back up. So if you watch, I'm coming down, picking up, my eyes come forward, I put it back down, load's coming straight up and down. A squat, I keep with my paint can, my gallon jug, right? A squat is going to be dropping the hips down, my eyes forward, dropping my hips down. That's where you're a little bit of a liability there in the spine, Maya, is if you want to keep track of that tendency to
overextend.
yeah, right? Yeah. A couple of tips for a squat is to have, if you guys have shoes on, maybe you have a positive heel, right? The heel is up a little bit, but if you're barefoot like I am, I just put a blanket under my heels, and that can go a long way to getting further down in your squat. And it's just a way to learn it because it helps with the ankle dorsiflexion. Finally, I wanted to demonstrate, because it's I emphasized it, a push practice in progression. So we did pushing on the floor, just lifting the knees and lowering. You can come to a wall and start pushing. Good. We had questions on Wednesday about elbows tight versus elbows wide. Pick the one that works for you and try it. Maya's trying hers at the desk. I've been practicing mine on my sea chest, right? It's not all the way to the floor, but it's my full body weight. Back up. Finding a place and a way to practice push that's comfortable for you. It's a super helpful progressive overloading for all the pulling. It doesn't have to be painful. It shouldn't be painful. You want to find a zone where you can actually hold the weight, move it comfortably, and build your tolerance. You're building coordination. You're building that whole active co-activation. Then you're building higher threshold motor units, more of your hypertrophy, lateral transfer or transmission. And then finally, you've got stiffness in the tendons. And then progress to the next level. So you can go from the wall to the sea chest to the floor, their techniques. I want to stop here because we want a few minutes of questions. And I could, again, an hour is like, I need a month for every hour. So Maya,
Yeah.
if there are questions, fire away. And if there aren't questions, I can keep moving us.
Yeah, so far we don't have any questions, but if anyone, I forgot to mention that you can ask questions by putting them in our chat function at the bottom of your screens. And if any pop up, I'll let you know, Toni, but I think if we want
Okay.
to keep going for another couple minutes, that would be great. Like we
Okay.
still have 5 minutes, let's make them work for us.
All right. So here's something, squat, deadlift, push, lunge, rotate, single leg deadlift. For some folks for whom a deadlift really, like if, for example, your hamstrings are really tight, or if your knees tend to go this way, like if you're just put together, like you can go to the mirror and look at yourself and like, okay, do my knees push forward? Can I hinge my hips back? If that's challenging for you, there may be some kind of musculoskeletal imbalance where one side is tighter than the other, and there are ways to work it out, and I'm happy to discuss that. But one of the ways that you could then train your deadlift is actually a single leg deadlift, where you're going to pick up one leg and hinge just over one leg. And that creates it's almost like you're rather than bending in the knees and bringing the torso down, straightening and lowering the torso forward is obliging that supporting leg to lengthen and hold the load. And so again, you could have a dowel, you could do this at the back of your chair, and you can also do this with load. I would say if you were struggling with a plain deadlift, you were struggling with that hip hinge, don't load it, but just take it on the single leg. But then you could eventually create a kind of counterweight, right? So you can pick up, put down. Again, I'm keeping the relationship between my low ribs, the top of my hips, a unit, so that I have that intra-abdominal pressure, which is essentially what my breathing diaphragm and my pelvic floor is doing to create the kind of core. When people say core support, it's the breathing diaphragm pressing down and the pelvic floor supporting from underneath to create a kind of stiffness or firmness in the abdomen. And then when we relax, it softens, pushing. And that's really where your power is going to come from. So having the capacity to maintain that intra-abdominal pressure and then be out over the side of something, managing load, is going to go a long way to alleviating this shape, right? This shape is going to put a lot of pressure on the back.
Yeah.
And
otherwise known as the computer worker.
It's also the computer worker. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm definitely guilty of that one. So
yeah. Which reminds me, my last little note. If you haven't heard of rucking, there's a thing called rucking, which is basically having, I think I have like 10 pounds in here. Maybe it's less than that, but it's just a backpack with load. But that's kind of nice. Speaking of computer folks, so all of you who are at the desk for hours on end, if you're doing admin work, if you're doing billing, if like all of those folks, right, also have liabilities. Thank you for reminding me of that, Maya. So this is a really nice way. You can get like a fancy vest. You can get a vest that's weighted. You can get a rucksack that's weighted with plates. To be honest, I haven't found that necessary, like because I have the barbell, but this is a nice way to go for a walk with resistance on your body. Your shoulders are going to get opened up, and you're just going to basically create more of that compression and tension, and your body is going to begin to get stronger and stronger, sort of supporting underneath it. So people ruck with actually great quantities of weight, up to like 60 pounds. I mean, military guys are doing over 100, but I don't think we have to do that. So
Maybe not.
maybe not. Although some days,
Maybe someday. Yeah, I don't know.
right.
You never know. That was honestly so refreshing, Toni. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
I learned a lot the second time too. I was like, oh, I did this on Wednesday in person, but now I get to learn more stretching. So I'm really
Well,
happy.
and to be perfectly honest with everyone, like that's why when I say like we had 3 hours on Wednesday and I was like, I would love 3 months rather than 3 hours. I'd love a month rather than an hour. Like the truth is there is something about building it out from the beginning. And what I'm trying to do is throw a lot of spaghetti at your wall. And it's, you know, a little tiny piece is gonna stick. And if nothing else, maybe the deadlift or maybe just the notion that getting stronger makes us more comfortable in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I am going to encourage everybody who is in the webinar or who's viewing this virtually that they should check out the FishAbility webpage. When we post this, we'll make sure to include that link.
Awesome. Thank you.
Reach out to Toni if you want to learn more.